Hey everyone, so this is Harrow Season 3, Episode 10, called Ab Initio from the beginning. The case of the week stars a man who was found dead in a shipping container. Um, so he's brought into Quitham, and then um, where Harrow has been just walked into, and um, he then gets fired by Renee for no reason, just fired. Um, because, as you know, this whole season she's been trying to find a reason to fire him. And because she didn't get one from Fairly, she was just like, here you go, you're fired. Um, so Grace finds out, tries to, confront Renee about it, but doesn't really get far for fear of being fired herself. So she tells Fairly, who says, like, well, look, we need to deal with this autopsy before we can help Harrow. So they start the autopsy and find out he was severely dehydrated, had puncture wounds on one of his fingers, um, and as they're about to cut into the guy, Renee's son Louis sneaks into the autopsy room, um, and blood ends up squirting everywhere and into one of his eyes. So um, it seems like the guy died from a hemorrhagic fever. Um, so Grace and Fairly began a lockdown. Um, um, so during this whole thing, Harrow calls Grace after she calls him several times, and she's like, "Well, it looks like the guy had Ebola." Um, so when Grace rattles off the symptoms and of Louis and the guy, um, he says like, "Well, the guy couldn't have been dead for more than 2 days." Um, so he couldn't have contracted Ebola before leaving wherever he was that before that container brought him over to Australia. So he goes to the container to see if he can find out what gave it to him. Um, at Quitham, Renee is like, well, Fairly, if you don't let my son out, I'm gonna fire you. So Fairly is like, I don't care. So fire me if you want. Um, so Harrow looks at the video surveillance and finds out a monkey escaped from the container when it was first opened. And one of the men named Andy Spiro had he had uh, seen the monkey escape and thought, it would have uh, like he would get money for it. So he finds out that from Andy's coworker um, his address and tries to go find out what this guy knows. Um, Harold goes to the guy's home, uh, sees Andy running, and chases after him. And when he catches up to Harold or Andy, he realizes that the guy Andy killed the monkey anyway, but the monkey had was a carrier for. I don't think they said which disease it was, but he whatever disease it was, the monkey was just a carrier. He didn't have any symptoms, so he calls Grace, tells her to give her Louis the shot of um, cyanovirin, um, and it saves Louis. Um, and then later, when Harrow goes back to Quickham, he gets a hug from Renee and says, "Well, she tells him, you're, I mean, technically you're still fired, but I'll fix it so that you're not anymore, or helping to save my son. And the only reason why she's doing that is because Fairly is like, well, it was the if Grace and Harrow hadn't helped, he wouldn't be alive. So anyway, so now going over to James and his bullshit. Um, Fern, you know, minutes after seconds after she gets into the house, she sees everything all turned upside down, and um, so she's trying to call someone, whether it's 911 or Harrow, I don't know, because that's when Callan comes walking in, and so they both hear a car pulling up, and it's holding the two men from before. And so they run out the house and get away. And as they walk down the street, elsewhere, Callan gets a call from Fern's phone that she switched with James's phone, and it's actually Mila saying she has James. So Callan takes James's phone and leaves in a taxi. Um, so Callan then eventually, after Harold gets fired, Callan tracks him to a bar and shows him that they got James's phone. And on the way out, Callan tells him that Fern didn't want to tell him, and that she and James used Harold's email to get the phone at police headquarters. Harold then takes the phone to fix the mess they made, and once in the car, Mila calls him from Fern's phone, and she's like, we need to meet in person, and as a way to get your ass over there, uh, I'll show you I have James. So while he's having to deal with, you know, Louis uh, um, and and saving Louis behind, he has to deal with Mila and all of that. So um, eventually, Nichols finds out that Harrow had requested James's phone to be taken up in his custody, and Fern had gone to take it. Um, and then eventually, like right before Harrow goes to talk to this Andy Sparrow guy, Nichols calls Harrow, and their phone call's recorded, and uh, Nichols is trying to get Harold to help him, and but only and Nichols is like, "Oh, I can help you, but only if you help me." Um, and so Harold eventually is like, "You know what? Yes, I lied to you. I knew my son was in town." Um, and I tried like um, he was like, I didn't know how to get the phone without out of headquarters without committing a crime, and so me and Tina tried to get him to go see you, but James wouldn't. Um, and so Nicholas was like, I don't know if I can believe that, and Harold was like, well, I don't blame you for not not being able to. So, but then he hangs up and then goes to Andy's house. So, after saving Louis, he goes to Mila's apartment, threatens to drop the phone if she doesn't let James go, because that's where her money is on his phone, um, like or the only way you can access her money is through a bank account app, um, an app, a bank app, with the account that James has, and so he realizes what the password is, logs in, and transfers the money. Um, we assume it's to Mila, but it actually isn't, and we don't know at this point. We don't know where it is. Um, and Harold sends the video footage of the night that Max died to Mila, where it shows that Max actually a, a, tried to attack James, and in doing so, fell over the railing of the boat to death. And while she's watching that video, Harrow sends the video to Nichols, um, and before Nichols can actually go arrest Fern and Harrow for obstructing justice, Nichols sees a video of what happened that night. So, um, him and everyone rush over to Mila's apartment, just as Mila and her henchmen are trying to escape. Um, but before they try to escape, James tells everyone that it was Max's idea to steal the money, and he feared Max might get greedy. So the night that Max died, they went to the boatyard, or the shipyard, um, and he hacked into the security cameras to send the recorded video to his phone. And lo and behold, yeah, that's what happened. So then they hear the sirens, and Neil's henchmen and cronies, try to run away, and but they're apprehended. Harold, still up on the balcony, Harold's like, well, I got rid of the money because he realized that, Mila was just going to end up killing him, James, and him anyway. So he got rid of it because that's the one thing she wanted. And James let slip that, well, look, it's the one thing I wanted too. So, and in the process, it disappoints Harrow. So, um, downstairs, after Mila and her henchmen are arrested, Nichols tells Harold that James wasn't actually his son, which I knew. I thought that James knew that he wasn't Harold's son. So, and I figured Tanya knew. So, I just thought James knew about it, about the paternity, and so yeah, I thought that he was trying to get something out of Pero, so which was just to get the phone back so he can escape with the money. So uh, um, later that night, Harold meets up with Fern, who walks over with Nichols, and so Harold gives a letter to her from James to let her know that they weren't actually siblings, and then so um, and all that stuff. So uh, turns out he actually sent the money to Fern's account, and he says maybe we should keep the money, and pretty much that sums up the whole episode and season. So um, yeah, I mean, as of right now, I don't know what's gonna happen with this season, or this series. I don't know if there's gonna be a season 4. Um, this, I mean, because usually at the end of season, because usually at the end of the seasons, what happens is there's um, something that leads into the next season, and that happened was at the end of season 1, and then that happened at the end of season 2, but it didn't happen here. So I'm assuming um, this, kind of happy and campy ending is supposed to be a way of ending the entire series. So that way, if they're not going to be renewed for a 4th season, that um, that way they kind of tied up loose ends and stuff. So that way there's no, questions really. Um, so I'm hoping for a season 4, but as of right now, we don't know just yet. Um, so with that said, that's the end of this season.